The early 2000s were a golden age for digital cameras. Companies like Olympus, Nikon, Sony, Canon, Ricoh, and others seemed to release an endless stream of unique, quirky, and often excellent cameras. I was lucky to work at a large camera store at the time, and almost every day I remember unboxing some new gadget that was pushing the boundaries of design and resolution. The most fun days, though, were when a new DSLR arrived. Some of the strangest and downright coolest cameras from this era were joint Frankenstein-esque collaborations between Kodak, Fuji, Canon, and Nikon. Kodak merged digital backs to some of the best pro film cameras of the time, including the Nikon F5 and the Canon EOS 1. In 2000, Fuji released the Finepix S2 Pro, which was based on the less than stellar Nikon N80 camera and looked like a Nikon with some sort of deformed grip attached. It was ugly. The camera received just criticism for being based on a low-end consumer model, as the N60 was not at all a pro body to begin with. 2 years later, Fuji released the Finepix S2 Pro, which was based on the more robust Nikon N80 body. And unlike the S1, the S2 had a much sleeker design, and the integrated grip that housed the digital bits and the rear protrusion were part of the overall aesthetic and didn't look like an afterthought as it did with the previous model. I remember when this camera was released because it was surrounded by a lot of hype. At the time, Fuji sensors used a unique interpolation that, we were told, effectively doubled the pixel count of the camera. So although the S2 Pro was a 6 megapixel camera, technically, it was said to give the effective look of 12 megapixels. Now, if this makes no sense to you, don't feel bad, because none of us really understood it at the time, and I still don't really get it 20 years later, but I digress. Now, I chanced upon a Finepix S2 Pro fitted with a 50mm Nikon F1.8 lens a few years back when a friend gifted me with a bunch of bins filled with old cameras. And it immediately brought back fond memories. And since in 2002, I was only allowed to test the camera delicately before putting it back in the box, all with white glove service, I was really thrilled to own one that actually worked perfectly. So I hope you enjoyed this review of a DSLR relic that's brought me a lot of joy 20 years later. Now, the first thing you notice about the S2 Pro is that it feels great. The size, the shape, the contoured grip of the camera make it a true joy to hold and to lug around. And since it was based on the N80, which was still kind of a mid-level camera with a plethora of plastic, it's not too heavy or too bulky, but it feels really, really good in the hands, even by today's standards. One of the best parts is the thumb indent on the back of the camera, which makes for a very nice user experience and grip. It just feels good. Now, the button and dial layout are also excellent. The basic functions are exactly like the typical Nikon camera of the era, with a front and a rear command dial that controls your aperture and shutter speed, and a 4-way toggle dial on the back of the camera that allows you to choose from the 5 AF points. But the best part of the menu system has to be the 4 unmarked buttons on the back of the screen. Now, they're not labeled, which was confusing at first until I realized that by pressing this function button, the menu icons on the little screen above will actually change. So it scrolls through a variety of menus, and each of those 4 unmarked buttons can control different aspects of the camera. For a 20-year-old camera, the autofocus is excellent. It's fast, it's snappy, and it usually has no trouble locking on the subject. Now, even in backlit situations where the subject is in a lot of shadow, I have found the focus to be consistent and fast with the attached Nikon 51.8 lens. I also love the simplicity of the focus system. The round cluster of 5 AF points, which basically just cover the middle of the frame, can be adjusted with this rear toggle switch, as I said, and they light red when focus is achieved. Although I mainly keep it on the middle focusing point and do the old school trick of half pressing and recomposing, it's easy to select an alternate focus point when needed. In today's era of hundreds of focusing points, drag and drop, LCD screen focusing, and other options, I really appreciate how straightforward this system is. It's super easy to use, and it brings me back to kind of a simpler time when dealing with autofocus. The camera uses either a compact flash card or the now defunct Smart Media card. Smart Media cards really held very little data, and they had exposed contacts, which meant they were corrupted very easily. The S2 Pro also has a pop-up flash, as I mentioned, ISO capability from 100 to 1600, and a whopping 2 frames per second burst mode up to 7 frames. Camera has a 1.8 LCD screen that doesn't tell you much about the final image because it's very low resolution, although the look does add to the charm. The S2 Pro features an APS-C size sensor and delivers 6.1 megapixels of resolution. As I mentioned before, Fuji used an interpolation method at the time, and they claimed that their cameras delivered what was effectively double the stated resolution. But I never really put too much stock into the claim, as the results looked back then to me like a 6 megapixel camera. I was really surprised by the images from this camera though, for a few reasons. Overall, they're sharp, they have a very pleasing look, although there is a sort of haziness to them, which I think adds to the nostalgia. But I was incredibly impressed by the in-camera black and white film simulation, which I used to capture the image of Jesse here and his guitar. Now check out the dynamic range and the detail that's retained throughout that image. It's really not bad for a 20-year-old camera. I also attempted some photos at my studio as well. In auto white balance, everything sort of tends towards the blues and greens, so I wasn't really thrilled with the results. But the color photo of Brandon that you see is not edited, and you can see the colors leave a lot to be desired. However, I edited it and made a black and white in Affinity Photo using tone mapping, and I think it came out pretty cool. If I use it again at my studio, I'm going to set my white balance manually and see the results. But my favorite way to use the camera, and where I really think it shines, is in natural light, as in this picture of my son holding a book. Kind of the most nostalgic part has been me remembering seeing images from this camera as I was working at the camera store back in the early 2000s, and they look how I remember them looking. And back then, Olympus had these really cool dye sub printers that we would use to test and print from the cameras, and I remember it having the same sort of look. So it's been fun for me 20 years on to play with this camera and see these images and be reminded of what the look was back then. But as I said, I think that the image quality in this camera is pretty darn awesome for such an older camera. And I think that if you can find one that works and you're into using older cameras and you like the kind of nostalgia of the old digital stuff, you're gonna love this camera. It's really fun and cool to use. The Finepix S2 Pro is a joy to use, and it holds up extremely well for such an old camera. Since it's basically a Nikon with a Fuji nameplate, the functionality and build quality are what you would expect to find in a Nikon from this era. Since the camera uses AA batteries and a compact flash card, it's also very easy to use in 2022 without needing any expensive or hard to find accessories. And since it has a Nikon bayonet mount, it can be fitted with a variety of inexhaustible lenses that are also very inexpensive, both autofocus and manual focus. Now, the one thing I will warn you about is that the sensors in these cameras do corrupt fairly easy. So if you're going to buy one online, just be wary and make sure that it works perfectly before you buy it. You have to be careful with it. I believe at the time there was some issues with Sony sensors that they were using in the camera, and there was a recall. But you just want to be careful, because even if the camera looks like it works, it might not be reading and writing to the card. And in fact, I've had some of my subscribers tell me they have had that exact problem with the camera. So just be careful as you find them. You can find them super cheap on eBay though, and it's a really fun and great camera to use. The last thing I'll say is this review is actually a redo of a similar review of the same camera, because a lot of my subscribers said that they were having trouble hearing it. Now, there was definitely something quirky about the sound in that video, so I decided to redo it, and I hope that it's much better this time and that everyone has enjoyed hearing me who couldn't hear me in the first video. So that's basically it. I hope you enjoyed this retro review as much as I enjoyed making it and as much as I enjoy using this camera. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Leave me a comment, and I will see you next time. Bye, everyone.